Nobody chose to relearn this the hard way. That needs to be said first. Because the people this video is about, the seniors living alone right now who are quietly, methodically rediscovering habits their grandmothers practiced without thinking, they didn't arrive here by choice. They arrived here because the systems they were told to trust didn't hold. Because the promises made to them over decades turned out to be softer than they sounded. Because 2026 arrived and brought with it a specific kind of economic pressure that exposed, clearly and without mercy, the gap between what modern financial life promised and what it actually delivered. The gap is real. The pressure is real. And the relearning, uncomfortable, humbling, sometimes painful, is happening right now in households across this country. But here is what I want you to understand before we go any further. The habits being relearned are not new. They are not innovations. They are not the product of some new financial thinking developed in response to current conditions. They are old. Some of them are very old. They were built by a generation that faced conditions as hard as these, harder in some cases, and that emerged from those conditions with their dignity intact and their households functioning because they had a set of practices that the modern financial system spent decades convincing everyone to abandon. The modern system said, you don't need to cook from scratch. You have delivery. You don't need a pantry. You have the store. You don't need cash. You have the card. You don't need savings habits. You have investment accounts. You don't need community. You have services. And then 2026 arrived, and delivery became unaffordable, and the store became expensive beyond what the check could cover, and the card carried a balance at 22% interest, and the investment account lost value in a year when it couldn't afford to, and the services raised their prices, and the community wasn't there anymore because it had been replaced by the services. This is the story of what was lost when those habits disappeared. And what is being found again, the hard way, by the people finding their way back to them now. What the modern financial system promised seniors, and where it failed to deliver. To understand why the relearning is happening, you have to understand what was promised. The promise, assembled over several decades of financial marketing and cultural messaging, went roughly like this. Save consistently in the accounts we recommend. Invest in the funds we offer. Trust the projections we show you. Follow the plan we build for you. And when retirement arrives, the accumulated result of all that consistent saving and investing will be sufficient. Sufficient to cover your expenses. Sufficient to last as long as you need it to. Sufficient to provide the security that previous generations built through habits and community and careful management of every dollar. The promise was appealing. It was also, for a significant portion of the people who accepted it, incomplete in ways that only became visible when the conditions changed. It didn't account for inflation running at rates that eroded purchasing power faster than fixed incomes could absorb. It didn't account for healthcare costs rising at rates that consumed savings faster than projections suggested. It didn't account for the specific vulnerability of someone living alone. One income, one set of hands, one person carrying every cost that a two-person household would have split, in an economic environment that had been pricing things as though households came in pairs. It didn't account for 2026. Not this specific year necessarily, but the category of year this is. A year when fixed incomes feel fixed in the worst sense of the word, when prices move and the check doesn't, when the gap between what comes in and what things cost has become a daily source of calculation and compromise that the promise never mentioned. The people relearning the old habits are not relearning them because they failed to follow the plan. Many of them followed it precisely. They are relearning them because the plan, it turned out, was built on assumptions that the present has not honored, and the habits being relearned were built on no assumptions at all. They were built on the practice of managing whatever was actually present, not whatever was projected to be present, not whatever the plan said should be there, but whatever was actually in the account, on the shelf, in the pantry, in the neighborhood, with the discipline and attention that transforms limited resources into sufficient ones. That transformation is still available. It is being rediscovered right now, and the relearning, hard as it is producing something real, the cooking habit. That modern convenience replaced, and what was lost when it left. The first thing the modern food system replaced was cooking. Not entirely, not all at once. Gradually, over decades, through the accumulation of options that made cooking feel optional. The frozen meal, the takeout app, the rotisserie chicken purchased ready to eat, the meal kit delivered to the door with pre-measured ingredients and laminated instructions. Each one a convenience. Each one a transfer of something, skill, time, money, from the household to an outside provider. The trade seemed reasonable when the options were affordable. When a delivered meal cost $12 and the alternative was an hour in the kitchen, the calculation felt close enough that convenience won. The calculation doesn't feel close anymore. The same delivered meal costs $22 with fees and tip. The same rotisserie chicken that anchored a week of meals has increased in price significantly. The meal kit subscription that seemed like a clever middle ground between cooking and ordering has become a recurring charge that the budget is examining with new seriousness. And the skill, the cooking skill that the convenience options displaced, is not fully there anymore. The knowledge of how to turn a chicken carcass into a week of broth, how to build a meal from the odds and ends at the back of the pantry, how to make a pot of beans that costs almost nothing and feeds several dinners, how to use what's in the house rather than ordering what's desired. That knowledge is being relearned. In kitchens across the country, seniors who spent years relying on convenience options are rediscovering the old methods, not from cookbooks, not from apps, but from memory, from the way their mothers did it, from the recipes written in margins of handwritten notes found in the backs of drawers, from trial and error with ingredients that are already in the house and don't cost anything additional to try. The relearning is slow. It requires patience with failure. It produces meals that are sometimes imperfect. And it produces, alongside those imperfect meals, a capability that convenience had displaced. The capability to feed yourself well, reliably, at a cost that doesn't require a calculation about whether it fits the week's remaining budget. The modern food system promised convenience and delivered dependence. The old habit promised neither convenience nor dependence. It promised competence. And competence in 2026 is worth considerably more than it seemed to be when everything was affordable. The cash system that cards replaced, and the specific vulnerability that replaced it, created the modern payment system, made a specific and compelling argument for why cash was obsolete. Cards were safer, it said, easier to track, accepted everywhere, replaceable if lost, fraud protected in ways that lost cash was not. The rewards programs returned a percentage of every purchase. The digital statements made budgeting easier. The automatic payments ensured that bills were never missed. All of this was true, and none of it addressed what the cash system had actually provided that cards could not. The cash system provided a physical, visceral, real-time experience of spending that the card completely eliminated. When you hand over bills, you feel it. The transaction has weight. The wallet is lighter. The physical reality of the exchange produces a resistance, a momentary friction, that the tap of a card or the click of a checkout button does not produce and was specifically designed not to produce. The payment industry spent billions of dollars making transactions feel like nothing. Frictionless, they called it. The word was a feature description. It was also an accurate description of what was removed when friction disappeared. The natural resistance that makes people pause before spending, reconsider whether the purchase is necessary, and sometimes decide that it isn't. The people relearning the cash system in 2026 are discovering what frictionless cost them. Credit card balances carrying interest at rates that consume a meaningful portion of fixed monthly income. Subscription charges accumulating on statements that are checked for the total rather than read for the details. Spending that exceeded the budget not through any single large decision, but through the accumulation of small, frictionless transactions that individually felt like nothing and collectively became significant. The cash envelope system that grandmothers ran doesn't require apps. It doesn't require a bank's cooperation. It requires a specific amount of cash, some envelopes, and the discipline to spend only from the category designated for each purchase. When the grocery envelope is empty, groceries are done. The resistance is physical, immediate, and impossible to rationalize around. The balance in the envelope is visible at a glance. The consequence of overspending is felt immediately rather than discovered at the end of the month when the statement arrives. The people rediscovering this system are describing the same experience the previous generation had. It is uncomfortable at first. The constraint feels arbitrary. The habit of reaching for the card is strong, and the envelope feels limiting in a way the card never did. And then the end of the month arrives, and there is money left. Not much, perhaps, but something. For the first time in longer than some of them can remember, there is something left. That something is the friction working. That something is what Frictionless took away. The Pantry system. That grocery apps replaced, and the fragility that replaced it created. The grocery delivery app made a promise so convenient it was difficult to argue with. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, delivered to your door within hours. No planning required, no trip to the store, no list prepared in advance. Simply identify what's needed, order it, and wait. The promise delivered on its terms. And in delivering on its terms, it replaced something that the previous generation had built over decades of necessity, and that nobody noticed was gone until it was needed. The pantry system. Not the pantry as a storage cabinet. The pantry as a managed resource. Stocked deliberately, rotated consistently, planned around, and capable of producing a week of meals without a store run because that capability had been intentionally built and maintained. The grocery app didn't require a pantry system. It was the alternative to a pantry system. Why maintain a rotation of staples when anything could be ordered and arrive the same day? Why stock dry beans and rice and canned tomatoes in organized, rotated quantities when fresh ingredients could arrive on demand? The answer that 2026 is providing the hard way, is that the on-demand system works precisely as long as several conditions hold simultaneously. The delivery service remains affordable. The store remains stocked. The budget has room for impulse ordering. Transportation is available if delivery isn't. Health and mobility allow for shopping when delivery fails. When any of these conditions breaks down, the household without a pantry system has nothing to fall back on. The refrigerator holds what was ordered recently and nothing else. The cabinets contain what seemed needed at the time of the last order rather than a managed reserve capable of producing multiple meals independently. The seniors relearning the pantry system are starting from the beginning. Learning which staples to maintain. Learning the first-in, first-out rotation that prevents waste. Learning to build the meal plan from what's on the shelf rather than from what's desired. Learning to audit the pantry before making a list rather than making a list before checking the pantry. The relearning is not elegant. It produces a few awkward weeks of meals built from mismatched staples while the system is being established. It requires an upfront investment in building the stock before the system can function. And then the system starts working. The pantry starts providing what it was always designed to provide. The week can be fed from the shelf. The delivery app becomes something used occasionally and deliberately rather than reflexively and constantly. The grocery bill drops. The food anxiety, the low-level uncertainty about whether there will be enough, begins to quiet. The app promised convenience. The pantry system provides security. In 2026, with grocery prices where they are, the distinction between those two things has become impossible to ignore. The community habit that service apps replaced, and the isolation that replaced it created. This is the loss that is hardest to measure and hardest to reverse. The previous generation had neighbors, real ones, people they knew by name and by skill and by need. People they exchanged things with, food from the garden, help with a repair, a ride to the doctor, knowledge about where the bargain was this week and what to avoid. People whose presence in their lives was practical as well as social, useful as well as pleasant. This informal community was the original safety net, not a backup to institutional systems. The primary system, with institutions serving as the backup for what community couldn't provide. The service economy replaced it gradually and convincingly. Why ask a neighbor for a ride when there's a rideshare app? Why borrow a tool when you can order one delivered tomorrow? Why trade garden produce when the grocery store has everything? Why maintain the relationship when the service can provide the function without the reciprocity? The answer. 2026 is teaching in a way that is sometimes painful, is that the service economy provides the function and nothing else. It provides the ride without the relationship, the tool without the knowledge of who has skills you might need next month, the groceries without the neighbor who noticed you hadn't come out in 3 days and knocked to check. The seniors living alone who are relearning community are doing it differently than the previous generation did, because the infrastructure of neighborhood life has changed. The front porches where people gathered are less populated. The churches and civic organizations that structured community interaction have fewer active members than they once did. The informal economy of favors and skills and shared resources requires relationships that take time to build, and that the service economy made it possible to avoid building. But the relearning is happening. The senior center that seemed optional is becoming a weekly commitment. The church potluck that seemed like a social obligation is becoming a genuine source of connection with people who know how to do things and are willing to help. The neighbor whose name was known but whose life was not is becoming slowly someone known more completely, someone whose truck might be borrowed and whose knowledge of plumbing might be called on, and whose extra tomatoes from the garden might be traded for the extra eggs. The service apps promised connection through convenience. What they delivered was convenience without connection. And in 2026, the households that have connection and lack some convenience are managing considerably better than the households that have convenience and lack connection. The relearning of community is the slowest relearning on this list. It cannot be accomplished in an afternoon. It requires showing up repeatedly, in the same places with the same people, offering what you have, and accepting what's offered, until the accumulation of small interactions becomes something that functions like the neighborly economy the previous generation built. It is worth building, because what it provides, practically, financially, emotionally, is something that no app has ever replicated and no service has ever replaced. I'll see you in the next one. If this gave you something real, hit the like button and subscribe. Every week, I put out videos like this one for the people who are done waiting for the system to fix itself and are ready to use what actually works. Share this with someone who's in the middle of the relearning right now. Someone who's figuring it out the hard way and needs to know they're not alone in it, and that what they're building is worth building. This knowledge traveled person to person for generations before it had to travel this way. It still reaches the people who need it,